My husband of 7 years had been having a 4-year affair with my best friend. My husband, Mark, 36M, and I have been married for 7 years, together for 10. We met through mutual friends in college and hit it off instantly. He was charming, attentive, and seemed like everything I could want in a partner. Our relationship wasn't perfect. No relationship is. But I thought we had something solid, something worth fighting for. We had our ups and downs, but we always managed to work through our issues. Or at least that's what I thought. My best friend, Rachel, 33, has been in my life since high school. We survived the awkward teenage years together, supported each other through college, and remained close even as our lives took different directions. She was my maid of honor at my wedding, has been there for every major life event, and I trusted her completely. I confided in her about everything, including the occasional struggles in my marriage. This past week was supposed to be special. Mark and I were celebrating our 7th wedding anniversary. We had planned a weekend trip to the beach house where we got engaged, and I was genuinely looking forward to reconnecting with my husband. Things had been a bit distant between us lately, but I chalked it up to work stress. Mark owns a successful marketing firm that keeps him busy, and I've been putting in long hours at the hospital where I work as a pediatric nurse. 2 days before our trip, I had to use Mark's laptop to finish some paperwork since mine was having issues. That's when I found it. An email account I didn't know existed still logged in. I wasn't trying to snoop, I swear. The notification popped up while I was working, and the preview showed a message from Rachel that started with "I miss you already." My heart stopped. I know I shouldn't have read further, but I couldn't help myself. I clicked on the email and then scrolled through their correspondence. Hundreds of messages going back 4 years. 4 years. The entire email account was dedicated to their communication. Romantic messages, explicit photos, plans for their meetups when I was working night shifts or traveling to see my parents. I felt physically ill as I realized that the 2 people I trusted most in the world had been betraying me for more than half of my marriage. There were messages about how they had to be careful around me, how they needed to keep up appearances, discussions about weekend getaways disguised as work trips for him and girls' weekends for her. They had created an entire secret life together while maintaining their relationships with me. The worst part, Rachel had been consoling me about my failing marriage while actively contributing to its destruction. All those times I confided in her about feeling disconnected from Mark, she offered me advice like, "Give him space and focus on yourself." Now I understand why she was creating distance between us for her benefit. I sat there for hours, reading through years of betrayal, trying to make sense of it all. I wanted to scream, to break things, to call them both and unleash my fury. But something inside me just froze. I felt a strange calm wash over me, the kind that comes when you're in too much shock to process emotions properly. Instead of confronting them immediately, I made a decision that some might call calculating, others might call cruel, but it felt necessary for me. I would pretend I knew nothing. Our anniversary celebration would proceed as planned. You might be wondering why I didn't just confront him right away. And honestly, I asked myself the same question. But the thought of having a private confrontation where they could control the narrative, minimize their actions, or spin lies to our friends and family afterward felt unbearable. For the next 2 days I was the perfect wife. I packed for our trip. I smiled. I even initiated intimacy, all while feeling like I was outside my body watching someone else go through the motions. Mark noticed nothing amiss. He was too wrapped up in his own excitement about the weekend, constantly checking his phone, which I now knew was to update Rachel. What Mark didn't know was that I had made some changes to our anniversary plans. I invited all our closest friends and family for a surprise anniversary party at the beach house on Saturday night. I told everyone it was a surprise for Mark and asked them to arrive by 7 p.m. I even invited Rachel, telling her I wanted my best friend there for this special occasion. The weekend started normally. We drove to the beach house on Friday, had dinner, and spent the night pretending everything was fine. Saturday morning, Mark suggested we go for breakfast at our favorite beachside cafe. I agreed, and while we were there, I excused myself to go to the bathroom but actually call the catering company to confirm the evening's arrangements. When we returned to the beach house, Mark mentioned he needed to make some work calls. I now knew he was calling Rachel, but I simply smiled and said I'd take a walk on the beach to give him privacy. During my walk, I confirmed with all our guests that they were still coming and made sure everything was in place for the evening. By 6:30 p.m. I was dressed in the red dress Mark had always loved, hair done, makeup perfect. Mark was confused when I suggested he should change into something nicer for our special dinner, but he complied without suspicion. At exactly 7 p.m. the doorbell rang. Mark looked confused, but I simply smiled and asked him to get the door. The look on his face when he opened the door to find 30 of our closest friends and family members shouting surprise was priceless. For a moment he was genuinely shocked and touched, thinking they were all there for our anniversary. The party started wonderfully. Everyone was mingling, drinks were flowing, and Mark kept looking at me with genuine gratitude and love, clearly thinking I had planned this beautiful surprise just for him. Rachel arrived about 30 minutes late, and I watched as she and Mark carefully maintained their distance, exchanging only brief greetings while throwing furtive glances at each other when they thought no one was watching. Around 8:30 p.m. I clinked my glass and asked for everyone's attention. The room quieted down and all eyes turned onto me. Mark moved to stand beside me, probably expecting me to make a loving toast to our years together. "I want to thank everyone for coming tonight," I began, my voice steady despite my racing heart. "It means so much to have all the people we care about in one room. Before we continue celebrating, there's something I need to share with all of you." I took a deep breath and looked directly at Mark. 7 years ago, I married a man I thought was honest, loyal, and true. I believe we have built a life based on mutual respect and trust. Mark was smiling, clearly expecting this to lead into a romantic declaration. Rachel stood across the room sipping her champagne, looking slightly uncomfortable but not yet alarmed. 2 days ago, I discovered that for the past 4 years, more than half of our marriage, my husband and my best friend had been having an affair. The room went completely silent. Mark's face drained of color and Rachel froze mid-sip, her eyes wide with shock. Before either of them could react, I pulled out my phone and started reading selections from their emails. The dates and times of their meetings, the lies they had both told me to cover their tracks. Mark wasn't working late all those nights he was with Rachel. Those business trips to Chicago, also Rachel and Rachel's girls, weekends with her college friends. Those were spent with my husband in hotels I paid for with our joint credit card. As I spoke, I watched their faces crumble. Mark tried to approach me to stop me, but I held up my hand. "Don't. You've had 4 years to speak. Now it's my turn." I turned to our guests, many of whom looked horrified, some in tears. "I'm not sharing this to embarrass myself or to gain your sympathy. I'm sharing this because I refuse to be the only one carrying the burden of their lies. I refuse to be the one who has to make excuses for why my marriage ended. The truth is that it ended years ago. I just didn't know it." Rachel finally found her voice. "Alexis, please, we can explain." "Explain what?" I cut her off. "Explain how you comforted me when I cried about feeling disconnected from my husband, all while knowing you were the reason. Explain how you both laughed at me behind my back." "I've read everything, Rachel. There's nothing left to explain." Mark was shaking, tears streaming down his face. "Alexis, baby, please, not like this. We can talk about this privately." I looked at him calmly. "We're long past privacy, Mark. You didn't seem concerned about my privacy when you were sharing details of our marriage with her. You didn't worry about privacy when you sent her pictures of yourself from our bathroom, from our bed." My parents stepped forward, my father's face flushed with anger, my mother in tears. Mark's parents looked shell-shocked, his mother covering her mouth in horror. Rachel's boyfriend of 2 years stood frozen in disbelief. Having discovered his own betrayal alongside everyone else, I raised my glass one last time. "So thank you all for coming to what will now be our divorce party. There's plenty of food and drink, and I've arranged for taxis for anyone who doesn't feel comfortable driving. As for me, I'll be leaving now. I've already packed my things. I've authorized the catering staff to lock up when everyone's gone." With that, I placed my wedding ring on the table, picked up my overnight bag from beside the door and walked out. Behind me, chaos erupted. I could hear shouting, crying, the sounds of a world shattering. But it wasn't my world anymore. My world had shattered 2 days earlier in the quiet of my living room. I had already checked into a hotel nearby and had arranged for a friend to pick me up around the corner. As I got into her car, she asked if I was okay. I honestly didn't know how to answer. Was I devastated? Yes. Heartbroken. Completely. But there was also a strange sense of relief in having the truth out in the open, not having to pretend anymore. That was 3 days ago. Since then, my phone hasn't stopped buzzing with messages, some from friends and family offering support, others criticizing me for the public humiliation I inflicted. Mark has called and texted hundreds of times, alternating between desperate apologies and angry accusations about how I didn't have to destroy him publicly. Rachel sent one long email essentially blaming me for being emotionally unavailable, which apparently forced them together. I haven't responded to either of them. I've been called calculating, cold-blooded, and cruel for how I handled the situation. Maybe they're right. Perhaps there was a more dignified way to handle betrayal of this magnitude. But after years of being deceived, manipulated, and made a fool of by the 2 people I trusted most, I couldn't bear the thought of them controlling the narrative of our breakup. This morning I filed for divorce. I've blocked both Mark and Rachel on every platform. I've taken a leave of absence from work and am staying with my sister in another state while I figure out what comes next. I've lost my husband, my best friend, and the future I thought we were building together. But strangely, I don't regret how I handled it. For the first time in years, I'm living in truth, even if it's a painful one. Was I wrong for exposing them the way I did? Should I have handled it differently? I genuinely don't know. All I know is that I'm finally free from a life built on lies, and somehow that feels like the first step toward healing. It's been a month since everything fell apart, and I wanted to provide an update since so many of you have reached out with support and advice. First, thank you to everyone who defended my actions. The validation from strangers has been unexpectedly comforting during this nightmare. To those who called me heartless or said I went too far, I understand your perspective, but unless you've been betrayed by the two people you trusted most, it's hard to judge how anyone should react. The aftermath of the party has been intense. After I left, apparently Mark had a complete breakdown in front of everyone. According to my cousin who stayed, he collapsed on the floor, sobbing, while Rachel tried to explain herself to her now ex-boyfriend. Mark's parents left immediately, too devastated to even look at him. My parents stayed just long enough to make sure all our guests had safe transportation before leaving as well. The next day, Mark's mother called me. She was crying so hard I could barely understand her. She apologized repeatedly for raising a man who could do something so terrible and assured me that neither she nor Mark's father blamed me for my reaction. That conversation meant more to me than I can express. Rachel's life has imploded as well. Not only did she lose her boyfriend that night, but word has spread throughout our friends' circle and her workplace. She sent me another email claiming that I deliberately ruined her life by exposing her instead of handling it privately. I didn't respond. As for Mark, he's been on a campaign to win me back. He sent flowers to my sister's house. I still don't know how he got her address. Written letters promising therapy and change, and even tried to get mutual friends to advocate for him. Last week he showed up at my sister's house unannounced. My brother-in-law turned him away, but it was disturbing enough that I'm considering a restraining order. The divorce proceedings are moving forward. I hired an excellent attorney who is making sure I'm protected financially. Mark initially wanted to contest everything, trying to use it as leverage to get me to talk to him, but his own lawyer apparently convinced him that given the circumstances, he should consider himself lucky if I don't take him for everything he's worth. Some developments have been unexpected. 3 of Mark's clients have reached out to me personally to express their support. Apparently they heard what happened through industry gossip and have since pulled their business from his firm. I didn't ask for this and don't take any pleasure in his professional suffering, but it's not my responsibility to manage the consequences of his actions. The most surprising thing has been discovering who my real friends are. People I wasn't particularly close to have shown up with unwavering support, while others I considered good friends have kept their distance, uncomfortable with the messiness of it all. My hospital colleagues have been amazing, covering my shifts and sending care packages to my sister's house. As for me, I'm doing therapy twice a week and trying to rebuild some sense of normalcy. There are still moments when grief hits me like a physical blow. Not just grief for my marriage, but for the friendship I thought I had with Rachel. There are nights when I wake up panicking, wondering if I made the right decision in how I handled things. But then I remember that I didn't create this situation. I just refuse to let it remain hidden. I'm starting to think about what comes next. My sister has offered to let me stay as long as I need, but I'm looking at apartments in a city about an hour from where Mark and I lived. I've been offered a position at a children's hospital there, and the idea of a fresh start is appealing. I'm not ready to date again. The thought actually makes me feel physically ill, but I'm trying to rediscover who I am outside of my marriage and that friendship. For those who asked if there were signs I missed, yes and no. Looking back, there were moments that should have raised red flags. Mark becoming protective of his phone. Rachel asking detailed questions about my work schedule. Both of them having emergencies that prevented them from attending certain events. But they were careful and I trusted them completely. That trust was my blind spot. I don't know what the future holds, but I do know that I refuse to let their betrayal define the rest of my life. I'm angry, I'm hurt, but I'm also determined to rebuild something better from the ashes they left behind. Thank you again for all your support. It's strange how the kindness of strangers can be so healing when those you thought were closest to you caused so much pain. Update 2. It's been 6 months since my world imploded, and I wanted to provide what will likely be my final update on this chapter of my life. First, the practical matters. The divorce was finalized last month. In the end, Mark didn't contest anything. He agreed to my terms without argument, which included me keeping our condo, which I've since sold, a fair division of our assets, and a clean break with no alimony. Either way, according to my lawyer, this kind of smooth divorce process is rare, especially with significant assets involved. But I think Mark knew fighting would only make things worse for him, socially and professionally. I've moved to that new city I mentioned and started my job at the children's hospital. The work is challenging but fulfilling, and focusing on helping sick kids has given me perspective about my own problems. My new apartment is smaller than our condo was, but it's mine, decorated exactly how I want without having to compromise with anyone else's taste. It's become my sanctuary. As for Mark and Rachel, I've maintained my distance from both of them, but information still reaches me through mutual connections. Mark's business has suffered significantly. He lost about 40% of his clients in the aftermath of our divorce, many citing concerns about his character as they departed. He's apparently trying to rebuild by rebranding the company and relocating to a different city. Part of me feels bad about the professional fallout he's experienced, but another part recognizes that trust is currency in any business, and he proved himself untrustworthy. Rachel has had a harder time. She lost her job. Apparently, her boss was friends with my mother and heard the whole story, and she's been essentially excommunicated from our social circle. Last I heard, she moved back to her hometown to live with her parents. She sent me one final email about 3 months ago, a strange mix of apology and blame that showed she still doesn't fully grasp the magnitude of her betrayal. I never responded. The most surprising development has been my relationship with Mark's parents. They reached out about 2 months after the divorce filing, asking if they could come see me. I was hesitant but agreed to meet them at a restaurant. They spent 2 hours apologizing for their son's behavior, sharing their own heartbreak over what happened, and making it clear that they still consider me family if I want that. It was incredibly touching, and we've maintained contact. They even visited me in my new city last month, carefully making sure Mark knew nothing about it. As for my own healing process, it's ongoing. Therapy has been essential. I've had to confront some difficult truths about myself and my relationships. Was I perfect in my marriage? Of course not. Were there issues Mark and I should have addressed? Absolutely. But nothing justifies the years of deception and betrayal. And I've had to learn to separate, acknowledging my own growth areas from accepting blame for their choices. Dating still feels like a distant possibility. I've had a few men express interest, including a doctor at the hospital. But I'm not ready. The thought of being vulnerable again, of trusting someone with my heart, is terrifying. My therapist says this is normal and that I shouldn't rush the process. For now, I'm focusing on rebuilding my relationship with myself. The question many of you asked was whether I regret how I handled the revelation, the public exposure of what was supposed to be an anniversary celebration. Honestly, no. In my darkest moments, I've questioned my methods, wondered if a private confrontation would have preserved more dignity for everyone involved. But then I remember the 4 years they spent lying to my face. The calculated deception, the way they manipulated me while pretending to care about me. They didn't worry about my dignity during all that time. They weren't concerned about how their actions would devastate me. The exposure wasn't about revenge, though I understand why it might look that way. It was about taking back control of my own story. It was about refusing to let them shape the narrative of what happened to my marriage. It was about making sure I didn't have to carry the burden of their secret, or spend months explaining to everyone why my marriage suddenly ended. Some might call that cold-blooded. I call it self-preservation. 6 months ago, I couldn't imagine ever feeling happy again. The pain was too all-consuming, the betrayal too profound. Today I still have bad days. Days when I look at old photos or remember anniversaries of special moments, but they're becoming less frequent. I'm building a new life, creating new memories, discovering what brings me joy as an individual rather than as half of a couple. This experience has changed me. There's no denying that I'm more cautious, more guarded, but also more aware of my own strength. I survived the worst betrayal I could imagine, and I'm still standing. There's power in that knowledge. To everyone who has followed my story and offered support, thank you. Sharing this experience has been part of my healing process, and knowing that my story might help others facing similar betrayals gives some meaning to the pain. This chapter of my life is closing. It will always be part of my story, but it no longer defines me. And that, perhaps, is the greatest victory of all.